The murders of Andrew and Abby Borden. Lizzie Borden was found not guilty by an all-male jury in 1892 in Fall River, Massachusetts. To understand why she was clearly guilty but the jury did not convict her, you have to understand a few things about the corrections system, the inheritance laws and society at that time and place. A jury found it very distasteful to convict a woman because executions of women just didn't happen. Hanging was the method at the time, and that would be the usual sentence for a double murder with malice aforethought. The thought of a woman dropping down the gallows with her skirts and petticoats billowing up, it just couldn't happen. But if a lighter sentence had been sought, a life sentence for example, there was no place to incarcerate her. Prisons for women were mainly for mentally ill women to be warehoused, and Lizzie was not mentally ill, and at any rate they were meant for the poor and crazy. The rich and crazy were locked quietly in attics. Jails were for short-term holding, and the personnel did not exist for any kind of lifetime house arrest. A shorter sentence than life was a bad precedent to set. So she was acquitted, but she did it. Under the laws of the time, her father's wife would inherit everything he had when he died, and Lizzie and sister were entitled only to what kept them out of the almshouse and personal items. When his wife Abby later died, everything went to her closest relative. Her closest relatives were not Lizzie and her sister, as they were her stepdaughters, their own mother having died when Lizzie was 5. Now, if Abby Borden predeceased her husband, then everything went to Andrew's 2 daughters. But Abby was significantly younger than her husband, and such a thing was unlikely. Lizzie was genteel, and in her mid-30s at the time of the murders. She was past what was considered marrying age at the time and possibly a lesbian, but that is an explanation of her marital state, not a reason for any prejudice against her. She was also unhireable, as most employers were below her social station and did not like to hire people so placed. She was looking at a bleak future. Previously, she had gotten along with Abby and called her mother. Abby, in turn, had said she would always take care of the girls and they could always live in the house. Andrew's estate was substantial, so there was capital to provide support for everyone. However, the 2 women had recently fallen out over something, and Lizzie had begun to call her stepmother Abby. There were a number of suspects initially. There was a maid who had a motive to kill Abby and several business associates with motives to kill Andrew. But the only people with a motive to kill both were Andrew's daughters, and Lizzie was the only one home, as her sister was visiting relatives out of town. Not to mention, the fight with Abby had been with Lizzie, not her sister. The coroner was certain a single weapon had killed them both, to the point that the skulls of the victims were displayed at trial to demonstrate this. Such forensic evidence was unusual in 1892. Moreover, there was a very curious thing. Abby was killed first, and Andrew about an hour later. Andrew was not home when Abby was killed, he being killed immediately after arriving home from the office. Also, Andrew was killed in a place where the body would be found right away, but Abby was in a place difficult to see. Who could loiter around unnoticed between the killings but a member of the household? The only ways of determining time of death in 1892 were temperature and rigor. Therefore, if Abby were cold and rigorous when found, and Andrew warm and still bleeding, it would be obvious that she died first. An educated layperson at the time would likely know that, but probably not realize how accurately a coroner could pin down the time of death and know an entire hour had passed between the deaths. At any rate, because it was clear that Abby had died first, the 2 sisters did inherit everything. Lizzie began a life of conspicuous consumption and enjoyed her control over her riches, yet was something of a pariah in Fall River. She did make friends in places like Boston, though, and had them often visiting the very large house she had bought, so the opinion of Fall River probably did not matter to her, and she'd gotten away with murder. double murder.